Greetings and salutations, and welcome to this episode of Playwright Spotlight. My guest today is a published and internationally produced playwright, screenwriter, actor, director, and college professor at Georgia State University. His stage plays have been produced nearly 600 times around the world and have won dozens of awards, including some from the Kennedy Center, the Metropolitan Atlanta Theater Awards, and many others. His screenplays have also won dozens of awards, including the Vegas Movie Awards, the Los Angeles Film and Script Festival, and Feel the Real International Film Festival, amongst others. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Daniel Guyton to the Playwright Spotlight.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. You know, it's funny. This is the first time we've actually talked.
I think you're right.
Face to face. We've had a couple Facebook exchanges, I think, here and there, and a couple emails. You've submitted to a few things, a few years of Play Noir.
That's right.
3 different, let's see, Grave Assurances, Macabre, Cadabra. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yep, you got it right.
And then Fat Dick.
That's right.
Hopefully we don't get busted for that.
Yeah, well, because it's about a detective. That's not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, which are all very good, and I feel bad that we still haven't produced anything of yours, but sometimes the competition is very strict.
Absolutely, of course. No worries. It'll happen eventually.
Yeah, and I've also seen your work here in Los Angeles at the Whitefire. I've seen a couple of your pieces there.
Yes, correct.
So let's talk about competitions then, shall we? Since it seems like you get around in playwriting circles. So how do you approach that? What makes a festival stand out to you to say, I want to be a part of this?
Well, all right. So I look at I don't look at it that way. I look at it as kind of a numbers game. And in a sense, for every 10 submissions I send out, I get 1 maybe. And for every 10 maybes I get 1 production. So I get a lot of rejections, but I get a lot of acceptances too. So the way I look at it is I submit to just about every competition that's out there that I remotely can qualify for. Obviously, if they're asking for something for Native American writers, I wouldn't qualify for that. Sure. But if it's something that I qualify for, then I will submit to just about everything. And so I submit tirelessly. And from that, I get acceptances and I get a lot of rejections. And I look at it as, for every rejection I get, well, I'm 1 step closer to my next acceptance from somewhere else. So
how do you deal with rejection?
It was hard at first. And there's still a few that I really, really want to be involved in, some of the big names like the O'Neill and things like that. But, so I've been doing this for over 20 years, so the rejections are a part of the game, and you get used to it pretty quickly. I think of it, it's not personal. I've also hosted a few festivals myself where I have to be the one giving the rejections, so I can kind of put myself in the shoes of the people who say yay or nay. And it's, I know that it's not personal. I don't think anyone's out there going, I don't like him. I think it's just a matter of it doesn't fit this time in this place, and but I look at it like you said, eventually. Maybe we can, get an acceptance next year if it's not this year.
Sure.
So,
on that note, what do you have just a horror story from a rejection that that stands out in your mind? It's like, oh, this one just still kills me. Or
there's one. There was a publisher that I had. They published one of my plays, and they said they were looking for more. And so they said we're looking for short comedies. So I sent them a bunch. And they wrote back. They said, "We're sorry, we're only looking for comedies at this time." And several of these had won comedy awards, best comedy awards, and I'm like, these are comedy. Like, what? Like, all right, you don't think they're funny? That's fine. Just say that, but don't tell me they're not a comedy when they're clearly they've been recognized as comedy. So that one kind of I was like, are you sure you wrote it to the right person? That just feels like the wrong reason to turn me down. If you don't like them, fine. But, so that one kind of bugged me.
Understandably. So, published, what are the steps?
Okay.
How does a playwright get published?
Sure. Well, first step, I would recommend any playwright or any writer of any kind specifically plays. If you want to get published, have it produced first. My first ever play that was published, I realized it was published, and we then had a production shortly after, and I was not happy with everything, but it was already published. So it was kind of like already in print. The publisher wasn't really going to do a reprint, wasn't a well-known enough play for them to, do the expense of reprinting. And so that one kind of got stuck as a published piece without being fully finalized. So I really recommend you don't publish until you feel the script is absolutely ready. So that's first thing. So make sure it's produced, make sure you are completely satisfied with it before you try to get it published. Once you are satisfied, you want to get it published. I, again, approach it the same way. I try to reach out to multiple publishers. For one thing, you're probably going to get turned down by a few. Not necessarily a reflection of the quality of the piece. I've had rejections because we have another book in the catalog that's too similar to your play. So it's just a sort of thing where it's not necessarily a statement on how good the piece is, more along the lines of what do they want to represent in their catalog. And so I submit to multiple places. And then also on a few occasions, I've had multiple publishers want the piece. And then I can kind of create a bidding war. I can go, well, this place is offering, this much royalties. This place is offering this. And they can kind of come back and forth and see who wants it more. So that's always nice to do that. So I do apply to multiple publishers at once. And the majority of publishers say that that's fine. One or two publishers will say, if you're submitting to us, please don't submit to anywhere else. And while we're considering it. And so that's something to factor in. But if they don't have that stipulation, then I submit to multiple places.
Do you mind talking about the royalties? What the differences that you've gotten, if you don't mind, just so,
Sure.
beginners out there might be able to, gauge or have expectations.
Absolutely. The majority of publishers will pay you very little for when you sell a printed copy of the book, because the majority of that cost is on them. They're printing it, they're publishing it, and all that stuff. But they will pay you a lot higher royalties when it comes to the production of the play. So if somebody buys a copy, I may get 15 cents on the dollar for, whatever that is. But if they produce the play, I usually get anywhere from some of the publishers, 50 to 75% of the royalty is from the production. And that varies depending on whether it's a 10-minute piece or a 30-minute piece or a 2-act play or so on. So different publishers will charge different rates based on that.
So the publishers actually get a cut of your royalties.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's what keeps them in business. They wouldn't do it otherwise.
Right. Okay.
The upside, depending on the publisher, is they can market it, around the world. I've had plays done in Egypt and Africa and all sorts of places because the publisher had reach in those places. So having a publisher actually, is great for marketing purposes, is great for, all of their customers will look at, well, we've liked their other plays. Let's look at what else they've selected. So, for example, I have one publisher that's Pioneer Drama. They're very elite. They deal with children's plays. If you can get in, they've rejected the majority, like 99% of my work they've rejected, but they accepted one of my plays. And their royalty rate it's on the lower end as far as what cut I get. But the amount of productions I've gotten out of it has been amazing. So
Really?
I've had a ton of productions from this one publication. And because of that, it works out well in the end. So, so even though their percentage is lower, the percentage of the royalties specifically I get, so I think I get 50% on the dollar, but I get so many productions that it's totally worth it. So
wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Where was I going to go with that? Because I had a follow-up question for you in that regard. So when you submit, or how do you approach your publishers that you go to, that you submit to? Especially now, because you've been doing this for 20 years, and sorry to interrupt, but I'm sure things have changed. So I'm sure back in the day maybe you were mailing it in.
You bet. Yes.
And so now technology's changed so much. So
Yeah, technology's changed, which is to the good and the bad. On the one hand, it's really easy to submit a script now. On the other hand, that means a lot more competition, because it's so easy to submit a script that anybody can submit a script, even if they, haven't vetted the script, even if it's not very well done. even if it's not been produced much. So I'm up against, thousands of other writers that have submitted their script as well, because it's so easy to just click a button. So hopefully my work rises to the top. There is a competitive edge. Theater you always think of as a collaborative art form, and it really is, but there's also, unfortunately, this competitiveness that comes in, and sometimes it can feel a little cutthroat. But basically, I look at submitting a play for the publisher the same way I do for a production. I send it out there. I hope they like it. Again, I try to send it to multiple places so that if I do get rejected, at least there's other options out there for me. And then I make sure to look at their guidelines. All the publishers have very specific guidelines. Like Pioneer, they gear towards children. So if I have a script, where, the language is maybe a bit more adult or the content is a bit more adult, I wouldn't even bother sending it to them, because I know that's not going to be their thing. Whereas there's other publishers, that's their focus is more cutting edge, avant-garde, adult themed stuff. I wouldn't send them my kids' plays because I know it's not going to go well there.
So these are blind submissions that you're doing, or do you always just wait and see if they're accepting?
Depends. Once I'm with a publisher, a lot of times they accept, they'll accept my work anytime because I already have a play with them. And when I say accept, they'll accept a submission. That doesn't mean they'll publish the piece. It just means they'll read it because I'm already in their catalog. So they'll go, okay, we'll take a look at your next work. They either say yay or nay, depending on situation. So as far as do I do blind submissions? It depends. If I'm not familiar with the place, if it's a new place, then they probably will ask for blind submissions. And what that means, if any of your listeners are not aware, I'll send an email with my name and contact information, but the attachment with the script has no personal information in it whatsoever. So when the person who receives the email, they know my name, but when they send it out to their readers, presumably they would send it with no contact information, and the readers would read it blind. So there's no favoritism.
Right, and that's my apologies again for that, because what I really should have asked is unsolicited submissions rather than blind submissions, because again, in this industry, two totally different things. Yeah,
right. Unsolicited. I would always check with the theater. Many theaters will accept an unsolicited letter or an unsolicited, maybe a sample of your writing. They'll say, if you're, some theaters will say, please don't send us anything. We're not looking for any scripts right now, which, I respect that. But if they say, we'll accept unsolicited sample of your work, never send them the full script. You send them maybe 5 to 10 pages of the script, as well as a cover letter explaining who you are. Would you consider reading my work? I've sent those out. It depends on the theater. If I really want to work with that theater, I'll send them an unsolicited request. So it just means, would you like to look at my work? I don't send the work. I ask them, would you consider it? Very rarely do I hear back if it's unsolicited, because that, there's a reason they're not asking right now, because they're probably too busy. But on occasion I've heard back and they say, yeah, sure, we'll take a look at it. We'll read it. In which case, I'll send it. But solicited, most theaters will say, we are currently seeking plays right now, and they'll tell you the guidelines.
Where do you look for your opportunities?
All right, I'm on a couple of different sites. There's the Playwrights Binge, which is a listserv. Different playwrights can share. They say, hey, I heard about this great opportunity. Here, check this out. And, and I'll share. Here's one I found, and different people. There's a great writer named Oren Squire who has a list called 6 Perfections that he shares different opportunities. There's NYC Playwrights. There's the New Play Exchange. There's also the official Playwrights of Facebook, and all of these places have different opportunities, and most of them are run by playwrights, and they share different opportunities that come up that we hear about.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
And then compensation. Now, we talked about royalties and whatnot a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, at this point in your career, do you still participate if it's just production?
Yeah, it depends.
Just,
I'd say it depends. There are some theaters that I love and want to work with, and I have a relationship with them. And if they say, hey, we're doing a fundraiser, can we use your script, voluntarily, I'll probably say yes, because I like the theater, I like the people, I know they're going to do good work. But there's also other places where I'm not that familiar, or maybe I've had a bad experience with them in the past, and if they ask me, I'll say, you got to pay me if you want to do it. I mean, I'm at a point in my career where yes, I want to get paid, obviously, but I'm aware that this, the real money is when you get published and you get your stuff produced, from multiple places at the same time. That's where you really get the money. So if this piece hasn't been done in a long time and someone says, hey, I really want to do this kind of obscure piece in your catalog, I'll probably say yes, even if it's very low pay or zero pay, because I want to see it get on its feet.
Now, do you have to go through, let's say it's published, and then can you negotiate that on your own, or are they going to throw down and say, hey, look, what are you doing?
Yeah. If it's published, you have to go through the publisher. I mean, that's just hands down. But a lot of times publishers have not all, but some publishers have a place where it's like, if this is for educational purposes, or if this is, they'll have negotiations they can do. And if I'm willing to forego my royalties, I could either maybe get them a discount, so they just pay the publisher rate where, without my royalty, or, I can, depending on who it is, if I have a relationship with this theater, I can reimburse them my royalty, or in some cases, some publishers will say, look, we'll let you do it for free, but you have to give us an ad in your playbill for our, so like there's things the publishers can work out depending on the situation. Specifically, if it's educational in nature, or if there's, or if it's a not-for-profit or something like that, where and again, this is not all publishers. Some publishers will offer a discount or a deal if they're willing to, do something for them, like advertise or something like that.
Okay. Do you get to negotiate your royalties, or is that something that they just say, oh, this is a one act, this is what we charge?
Yeah, well, the negotiation with the publisher is when I sign my contract. So if the contract says something that I don't like, I can either request a change. They may or may not agree to the change. If they don't, then I have to decide, do I want to sign this contract or not? But once I sign that contract, that is the royalty from that publisher. But any of my non-published plays, I get to, negotiate the royalties on my own.
What do you think, like hypothetically, let's just say for playwrights that may have work, but they're not represented, they don't have anybody. Sure. What do you think is a fair rate that they should negotiate for somebody who's maybe just starting out and saying, hey, if it's a one act, this much, if it's a full length, this much? Sure.
I always tell them $1 a page per performance. If it's a 10-minute play and it's $10, and then let's say they do it 5 times, that's $50. If it's a 100-page play, that's $100, and they do it 5 times, that's $500. So $1 a page per performance is pretty standard. And if the theater, wants to negotiate, then I'll hear out their terms. But that's pretty standard.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you have a mix of full length and one acts?
I do, yeah. I have a lot of 10-minute plays. I would say probably the bulk of my work is 10-minute plays. They're easy to write. They're very fast. I can kind of pump them out pretty quickly. But I do have 6 full-length plays. Okay. So and then a couple of longer one-act plays as well.
Is there anything that you've seen of your work that was just like they nailed it, or on the flip side, is there any pieces you've seen where like, oh my God, you guys totally missed everything?
Yeah, I've seen both. I have. I've been in this game enough. I've seen some real horror stories, and I've seen some wonderful, amazing productions. I love the collaborative process. I love it when someone comes in with new ideas and they find things that I didn't even see in the script. I love that when the director is like, oh, I think it's so cool that this happens, and I'm like, yeah, I meant for that to happen, and I really didn't, but I'm like, yes, that's really cool. So I love it, working with really creative and insightful people. But I've also worked with some who are maybe a little less diligent about doing their homework. I've had one production where, I went and saw it, and there's a scene where the guy stabs the other guy, and there was no stabbing that occurred. It didn't happen. And I was like, and it was, of course, a horror story, but I was like, well, how come the stabbing didn't happen? He's like, what stabbing? I said, well, it's in the stage directions. He goes, oh, I cut out all the stage directions. I just ignore them. I'm like, but the guy gets stabbed. I mean, it's kind of important. So that was a particular situation where I really just was kind of flummoxed by that director. But that
cut out all the stage directions.
Yeah, he just felt, I guess, what happened prior to the 1980s, every script would publish all the stage manager's notes in their stage directions. And then sometime in the late 1970s, early 1980s, the stage managers union said, if we're going to contribute our members' work to the publication, we should get a royalty. And so the publisher responded, good idea, but therefore we're not going to include your work any longer. So that's why all the scripts prior to like the 1980s have massive amounts of publication notes and production notes and stage manager notes. From then on, any stage directions you see are supplied by the writer directly. But a lot of the directors that came up prior to the 1980s came up with this mindset that any stage directions are written by a stage manager, not by the playwright. Right. Therefore, they're less important, which, that's a whole debate to be had anyway. But
right, sure.
And I remember I had a teacher when I was in college tell me, you don't need to worry about the stage directions for that reason. But since the 1980s, the stage directions have all been supplied by the writer. That the stage managers no longer have a say in productions or publications anymore because of this debate that happened with the unions back in the 80s. And so when the writer puts that in, it's kind of important, or at least in theory, there should be no stage directions on the page or dialogue on the page. That's not absolutely crucial. And so when the director chooses to ignore that, that's kind of it's kind of an insult to the writer. So I would encourage, if your listeners are directing, pay attention. I mean, granted, if it says actor crosses left and you want him to cross right, that's probably not going to be a big deal. But if it's something like where he stabs the guy, you probably kind of need him to stab the guy. It kind of seems important to the story. But yeah.
Do you, at the school that you teach at, do you teach playwriting?
I do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And through your competitions, what are some of the common mistakes that you have a tendency to see that playwrights should kind of be aware of early on?
Yeah, what happens a lot with plays specifically is a lot of students or younger people are very familiar with movies, and so the plays are very cinematic, which sometimes that could work. Angels in America is a very cinematic play, so there are certainly places where that can work, but a lot of times the students won't realize the difference between the two. And so, for example, the scene will be like 2 lines of dialogue, and then we have the massive scene change to go to the next scene. I'm like, that's really going to be hard on stage. Like scene changes are difficult. But the student, of course, in many cases is familiar with the movie where the scene changes like that.
Sure.
So really, they don't see the magic behind the cutting of the camera and the editing and all that. And so in their mind, I can go from this scene to the next without a problem. And so I would say probably one of the biggest problems I see with younger writers, even some of the older writers, is writing in a very cinematic fashion, which could work if they know that they are writing in a cinematic fashion. Like, for example, Angels in America, it's very clear from that script that the stage is supposed to move in and out, and like the furniture's on wheels, and it's really meant to be a fast-moving scene change, and the writer writes it that way. But the writer is clearly aware this is a stage play. Tony Kushner is aware that he's writing for the stage, but he writes it in a cinematic fashion, and I think that's fine. But if you're not aware of the limitations of the stage and you don't factor that into your script, that could be very problematic. So that's one big issue I've seen with that.
Any others?
Some of the other issues I've seen with younger writers is often they will try to write every single thing the character's thinking at every single moment of every day. But if you meet people, even if you think about yourself, very few of us ever share everything we're thinking. And if we do, we are probably considered to be the annoying person in the room who never shuts up, right? We all withhold information. We all, don't share what we're feeling at every moment. You might have to go to the restroom, and you're not gonna announce that to the room because no one else needs to know that, right? So there are many reasons, from all the way from malicious, trying to hurt people, all the way to benevolent, you're trying to spare somebody of something. We all withhold information constantly, every single day. Like right now, you may be thinking of your next question, but you're allowing me to talk, right? There's just things that we do. But a lot of times young people know that this character is supposed to, they want the audience to know what this character is thinking. And so they put every bit of their words coming out of their mouth, every bit of their thoughts coming out of the mouth all the time. And so I'm always trying to teach my students, figure out how to withhold that information. Silence can often be even more powerful than speaking. Think about the subtext. If you say, I hate you, that doesn't always have to mean hatred, right? People say to their friends, oh, I hate you. And they're joking around. Right. So figure out the subtext, what's going on underneath the words. And, I challenge my students. I want your characters to lie sometimes. I want them to come out and give them a reason to lie where they're not telling the truth or they're withholding information, and see what that feels like. Because that is a whole different, there's a level of reality to that. Whereas if the character is just blabbing incessantly without, that doesn't always feel real. It can if it's a specific character choice, but when all your characters are doing that, that's probably the writer not knowing when to hold back.
What makes good dialogue to you?
Good dialogue to me is dialogue that I believe I could imagine a person saying, even if it's like a science fiction or a non-realistic play. I still want the dialogue to feel like I can picture a person actually saying this in that context, but if the dialogue feels like I can't imagine anyone ever saying this in that moment, then I'm probably going to be pulled out of the script. So for me, dialogue should feel truthful to the moment in the story. Again, it doesn't have to be, it could be a science fiction. Oh no, there's a giant monster. That's probably not going to be very real. But do I believe that character in that moment would say that? That's kind of my barometer, whether I believe it or not.
So do you just write out this conversation, and then as far as like if it's between these two characters?
Oh, when I'm writing a script?
Yes. How do you approach dialogue in that regard?
Yeah, well, I've written many different scripts, and I try it different ways, different times, depending on the situation. Sometimes I'll start out with the dialogue. I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting conversation that just happened in my head. I got these like voices, not like in a schizophrenic, or way or anything like that, but I get these, like, I hear these conversations in my head. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of fun. Let me explore that. Let me see where this is going. Why are these characters saying that? And I kind of like think of it like a puzzle. And I'm like, okay, let's figure out who says this, why they say this, and I kind of work at it that way. Other times I'm like, okay, I know what the general plot that I want to go for is. Now let me have the character say these things. And then I kind of figure out, but even then as a puzzle, I'm like, well, where do I put the pieces so that the dialogue sounds believable and real? And if anytime I have a character say something that I'm like, I wouldn't say that in that situation. I have a hard time believing anyone would. I go back and I edit it out.
Where do you get your ideas on that note? You mentioned like, oh, this conversation, is that where your ideas stem from most of the time, or do you?
Yeah, a lot of times it'll be from a conversation. Sometimes because I submit to so many contests, I'll look at the guidelines, and the contest may say, we're looking for a play about Thanksgiving. I'm like, okay, well, what can I write about Thanksgiving? So sometimes I'll write to the contest, and I'll come up with some ideas that way. Sometimes I will, I listen to a lot of music, and sometimes like a song lyric will trigger me. And by that, I don't mean that I ever try to steal anyone's copyright. That is not at all. I'm very, very aware of copyright laws and so on. But I'll hear a song and I'm like, ooh, I wonder if there's a play on a theme like this, or I wonder if I could do a story based on this. And so what I'll do is I'll actively change it enough so that it doesn't violate any, copyright laws. I don't take any of the lyrics or anything like that. But I might try to figure out a story that kind of goes with the music or the song that I just heard, something like that. So ideas will come that way. I also grew up with a lot of puns and wordplay. And so sometimes my stories will start out with a pun or, kind of a play on words. Like you mentioned the play Fat Dick. Obviously, we all know, that sounds dirty, but I thought, what if it's just a detective who's overweight, so I kind of take like this phrase that sounds like one thing, and I kind of twist it to mean something else, and I write a whole play about this detective is overweight or something like that. So I kind of try to play on words sometimes like that.
Going back to this cinematic aspect that we were talking about with as far as writing goes, one aspect I wanted to touch on that is like, how do you feel about multiple locations in a play? I mean, like, for me, things that I went and saw outside of musicals, of course,
Yeah.
but a lot of stuff is, it's one location.
Mhm.
It takes place over 2 acts, 3 acts. But
Sure.
nowadays I find that a lot of playwrights, there's like, multiple locations.
Yeah, I think it is it's totally fine as long as the writer is aware of the limitations and the ramifications of that. If you're going to put a scene change in your script, know that if this, like let's say a low budget theater is doing your work, they're going to take longer to make that scene change happen than somebody that's, a very high budget that can, put everything on rollers and wheel things in and out. If you want to have your show done at multiple places, like a high school, if you want a high school to do your work, you have to know that they're going to have some limitations as far as how that scene change occurs. If you're aware of that and you're okay with, a scene change potentially taking very long, go for it, have a scene change. But you've got to be aware of those things and know how that factors into the overall production. So like I said, if you write a scene that's 2 or 3 lines long and then you have another scene change, that's a whole lot of movement just to have those 3 lines. And how crucial are those 3 lines really? So you got to kind of factor that in. The reason why most plays tend to be 1 or possibly 2 locations is because of the complication of changing that scenery. And, the writer is aware fully that that's a lot of work to get those scene changes to happen. If that's part of your story and you want that to happen. So I wrote one play, Where's Julie, in which I knew there was going to be a lot of scene changes. So I made the scene change people part of the story. So there's this sort of meta theatrical element where the running crew members are characters in the show. So they're moving the furniture and they're conversing with each other as they're doing it. So the scenes are getting moved, but the people moving it are just as much a part of the story as the people in the play within the play. So so there's an element of that where the scene changes become just as relevant and intricate as the show itself.
Sure.
So if you're aware of that, you can have fun with it, but just be aware that it's not always easy to do a scene change.
Sure. What do you think the most important element in playwriting is, or for you, I should say?
I think for me, okay, so there's a probably the best way I answer that for my students. I say, get involved with theater as much as you can. The more roles you take on in a theater, the more awareness you have of what an actor is going to go through speaking your lines, what a scene change person is going to go through when they change your scenes, what a director is going to go through when they are trying to make your show come to life on the stage, what a lighting person is going to be going through when they try to put lights on your stage. And so if you've done all these different roles in theater, that kind of gives you an insight. So when you're creating the show, you can create it knowing, oh, this could be a cool moment where they could put some really fancy lighting here. They could put some strobe lighting effects, and those are things that you can challenge your designers with just as much as you challenge your actors. So I think the most important thing, in all honesty, for the script is that it works as a whole. Meaning it works for the actors, it works for the director, it works for the designers, it works for the crew. It's something where everyone involved can feel good about their contributions to this piece. But if you've got an actor who comes in for 2 lines and then that's it, and they're gone for the rest of the show, they're probably sitting backstage going, why did I sign up for this? That's probably not going to be very good for them. It's collaborative. So when I write my scripts, I want to write something that all of the people collaborating on, all the way down to the running crew member, is going to feel like this is what a great project I am involved in. I'm so happy to be signed on to this. But if I think there's anyone involved that's going to resent or wish they weren't there, that bugs me. So I want them to feel like they're welcome and they're included and they're challenged and they're having fun with the process.
How because you mentioned collaboration a few times. So how involved are you once somebody takes on your play?
Depends on the play, depends on who's involved. I'm very good. If I trust the person that is directing and helming the show, I'm very good at going, hey, I'll come back, maybe like during one of the dress rehearsals. And I love to sit in on like first rehearsal so I can hear it and discover if there's anything that needs to be changed dialogue wise. Like if I see an actor struggling to say a sentence, then it could be the actor or it could be the dialogue. Maybe I need to fix something. And so often I like to be there for the first rehearsal or two so I can hear any places that are, maybe clunky sounding or things are just not as clear as they could be. And then an actor I can even say to the actor, did you have trouble saying that line? Is it because you read it wrong or is it because, something that I could fix? And so that kind of gives me a chance to fix a draft early on in the rehearsal process. And this is, of course, a new script. And then if I, trust the person that's in charge, I say, okay, I'm happy to leave you be. Let me know when you want me to come back. I'd love to come back for like a dress rehearsal or something and see, maybe do, anything else that might need to be cleaned up and I can help out with that. Or if it's, I had one experience where I had a director that I was not communicating very well with me. I kept asking this person, would you give me feedback? Or, it was a brand new draft of a play that I'd written before, but this was a new revision. And what I wanted to know is, does this revision work? Is there anywhere that we needs help? And I would ask this director, hey, what feedback do you have? And all I would get is, it's fine. I'm like, that doesn't help me. And so, the whole point of this was for me to, feel whether this revision works. So that one I ended up sitting in on more rehearsals than I wanted to, only because I wasn't sure that I could fully trust this director. And there were some moments we butted heads and, I didn't like that because that was not something I like to be able to trust my directors. I like to be able to go, hey, you got this. It's in good hands. I feel good with you. The actors like you, I feel like this is in, good place. But it's thankfully not happened very often where I did not trust the director. But sadly to say it's happened a few times where I just was like, got a bad feeling from the director. And yeah.
On those moments, were there any that, I was a little worried about this, but it all came together in the end? Because like usually, hopefully, most productions do. It might be a little rough, and you're like, I just don't know. And then once you get it on its feet, it's like, holy crap, this is the most amazing experience I've ever had.
Yeah, I have found that I've been again doing this for 20 years. I feel pretty attuned. Like if I get a good feeling off the bat, it usually goes well, and I feel good about it usually all the way through. If I got a bad feeling off the bat, I have very rarely had the experience where my feelings have changed throughout the process. So it's usually I feel like I'm often in a damage control scenario in that point, where it's just like when you're collaborating with someone, you trust the collaborator because the director is your collaborator. If I'm the writer, the director's the collaborator, the actors are the collaborators. And if I trust them, then it's wonderful. It's a great collaborative process. But anytime you're in a group project where you just don't feel like someone's not pulling their weight or they're not, bringing what they need to, you can feel a little frustrated. And I'm sure this person, the one that I'm thinking of right now, was frustrated with me. Probably thought I was butting in too much, but it was like, look, I just want the best for this piece. I want the best for the actors. I want the audience to have the best time. So there's a lot of stuff to factor into that.
How do you feel about having your work changed? Obviously you said we had the one incident with the stage directions being like, rewritten dialogue or anything like that, or like that,
I again, being a collaborator, I'm very collaborative. So if somebody says, I want to change it, this is my reason why, and they can explain their reasons and the reasons make sense, I usually say yes. I very rarely had to say no to a change unless it didn't make sense to me. So there have been a few requests to change things where I'm like, I don't get it. And if they couldn't really explain it to me, I'll sometimes say no. But if you can come to me and say, this is the reason why, I write a lot of children's plays. I write adult plays and children's plays. And so sometimes, the director will come to me and say, hey, I've got a person, or I've got too many girls in my cast, and I know your script calls for, this many boys, but I don't have enough boys. Can I make it a girl's? Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead and make it a girl's name. I want the kids to have fun. Please, that's a totally understandable change. I definitely allow those. In fact, even in my children's plays now, I include in there, these characters can be any gender you want, so on. I've even had some transgender children in some of my plays, and I'm like, or gender neutral, and I'm like, yeah, please use they, them. I approve, anything like that. But again, it depends on the change. It depends on the reason why, and it depends on their ability to, explain their reason. So
sure.
Yeah.
So what do you find it easier to write, children's plays or adult? And what's the draw with the children's plays?
Well, I found the children's plays tend to pay better because there's
good to know.
Schools often have a bigger budget than community theaters, depending on where the school is. And so if the play is getting produced at a school, they often can afford more than in a smaller theater. And often schools are desperate for plays that, don't talk down to their students. So when I write children's plays, I don't talk down to them. I look at it very much like the way Pixar and Jim Henson and they those companies deal with children. They try to talk up to them and then encourage the children to rise up to their level. And so, I of course don't use any bad language or anything like that, but I still try to challenge them by giving them, large vocabulary words. I try to put in things that really can kind of bring them up to, above their level, or I should say above the level that they're, many people expect them to be at. And I found most children will rise to the challenge if they're, they like being challenged usually. So I like to give them that.
So what age group are we looking at when we talk about children's plays?
So the first children's play I ever did was there's a theater here in town called the Alliance Theater, and they had a junior players program, which was 4th grade through 8th grade. And so these were, elementary school up to middle school students. And so that was my first experience writing a children's play. And since then I've written several, usually around that same age range.
What kind of themes do you cover in children's plays?
Yeah, for that. Often, a lot of times I'll look at what's, in the news right now and try to find a way to kind of couch it in some sort of mythology or some sort of, storyline that doesn't really beat you over the head with it or make anybody feel alienated. For example, I had one script called An Alien in Elementary School, which is really about space aliens, but the whole theme of immigration is actually in there. And it was very much about, why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. And, just because somebody comes from somewhere else doesn't make them bad or, anything like that. So the moral of it was, about respecting your neighbors, even if they come from somewhere else. Of course, in this play, they came from outer space, but, there's clearly an underlining theme of immigration and people from another country and not being maligned just because they're from somewhere else.
When you write these plays, are you writing it for their age, or are all your characters their age? Do you have some kids playing adults?
Yeah, that's a good question. The most of the ones I've written have the students in a classroom, but then the teacher shows up, the principal shows up. So there are some adult characters, and often the children will be playing an adult.
It's always fun. It's always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So go ahead. Oh, I was gonna say, so I had one where the space alien comes down, and of course the CIA is investigating, and or actually it was a NSA is investigating. So I had 2 adults playing NSA characters, and so it's a lot of fun for the kids to act all tough and act like grown-ups and things like that. So I'm aware of their age, so I write for them to behave differently than they would, if that makes sense.
Sure. More mature, if you will. Or
right.
Yeah. Going back a little bit, because we were talking about new pieces and being in the collaboration process and making changes. outside, I mean, how do you know when you're done? When
Good
you
question.
approach a piece, when do you know, when does Daniel say, okay, I'm happy with this and I think that's a wrap, rather than just, I got to the last page and
No, that's a great
I'm done.
question. I do look at, I hate things to be or feel formulaic, but I'm very aware of the traditional storytelling formula, which is that, you've got a character, usually a protagonist, a problem comes along, they've got to solve the problem, and you've got the entire length of the play to solve the problem. And then the climax is when the problem is solved or not, but the climax is where it gets decided whether this problem will be solved. And then, of course, you have your falling action, your resolution. And so the majority of my plays do follow that format, that pattern. I try to keep them very interesting and different within that. I try to find a lot of variations to that, but ultimately, all of my scripts have some sort of conflict that needs to be addressed or resolved. You've got a character dealing with that conflict. And so for me, if I get to the last page and the conflict's not fully resolved, or there's still lingering questions or something like that, then I've got to go back and fix that up. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. But yeah, so one thing that's very important to me is the reading process, by which I get actors to read the script out loud. And it's often, I like cold readings, because that's really when I get to really hear the lines that they trip up over or that they stumble through. Because if they get a perfect cold read, that means the script is probably pretty good. But if they're stumbling through and they're tripping over words, often it's my fault, because I wrote something a little too wordy or a little too, maybe I got a tongue twister in there I didn't realize I had in there. And so there's things like that where I have to kind of factor in. And if the audience is unclear about any element by the end of that cold read, I have to ask myself, well, are they unclear because they didn't see that moment visually, or are they unclear because I didn't write it clearly enough in my script? And those are things to answer, often within a cold reading of the script. And then, of course, a full production can go even further into those details. So for me, the script is not done until I've had a rock solid full production, and I feel every nuance that I needed to address is addressed in there. But usually, even in a full production, no matter how much the audience likes it, there's always going to be someone going, I just don't understand that one thing. And then I got to go, well, yeah, now that you mentioned it, that bothers me too. I got to fix that, or I go, well, that I don't care about that one thing. I'm not going to even bother with it. That sometimes audience members go down a rabbit hole, and you're like, that's not even in the script. So whatever. Right. It depends. I think I'm pretty good at taking feedback for what it's worth. What I've learned too, with as far as feedback from audience members, is if somebody says there's a problem with your script, they're often right. But if they say this is what the problem is, or this is how to solve it, they're often wrong. So an audience may be able to pinpoint the problem better than I can, but they may or may not be able to solve it better than I can, only because I have a bit more. I've lived with this story for however many months or years before it came out. So I can often once I know what the problem is, I can often fix it a little bit easier than somebody else could.
You're in Atlanta?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so you have access to talent.
Oh,
since, I mean, Atlanta's
wonderful talent here. Yeah,
right, exactly. Talent. So, what about like for actors that might not be in a talent-rich environment, where it's like,
sure.
Because they're like, oh, okay, the actors are getting it, and then it's like, I got Aunt, Kathy and my Uncle John. They're doing
sure.
They're gonna play these roles, and it's just like, and they're not actors, and so how can you fix
sure.
that?
Yeah,
you're dealing with a shallow pool of talent.
Yeah, that is a challenge. One thing, when I started out in college, and of course I was working with college students who, some of them were very talented, and some were starting out young. And what I would do is I would have a bunch of my friends over to my dorm, and I'd buy them all pizza, and they would read my script for me. And so I would get to hear it out loud. And like I said, some of them were very talented. Some were, just this might have been their minor, or they might not have even been into theater. They just like, me as a friend, so they were willing to volunteer their time. And there is stuff to be gained from that. I don't think if your script, I think if your script is good enough, it doesn't matter how good the actor is. You can see the relevance of your script in it. I've seen poor actors do Shakespeare, but at no point did I go, "Oh, that's Shakespeare."
Yeah.
Not a good writer. Like just because a poor actor does it does not necessarily take away from the script itself. Then again, a really good actor can make a mediocre script, feel like it's wonderful. And a poor actor can take a great script and make it feel mediocre. But I don't know. I would say if you feel like the reading itself wasn't up to snuff, you could always try to get another reading. If you can afford it, and maybe reach out to some other areas that are maybe not in your immediate area, but somewhere, let's say you live out in the sticks somewhere, maybe go into I'm sure there's a city not that far from you that you can go and maybe reach out and find some talent there. With social media, there's so many ways to get connected. Right now, one of the things that I find really great about, let me rephrase that. One of the things that I've found positive, the silver lining in this past 2 years with the pandemic is, things like StreamYard or Zoom or, any sort of virtual platforms. I have been able to do stage readings or Zoom readings with people from all over the world. We've had people from Australia. We've had people from India. I run a writers group here in Atlanta called Merely Writers, and we have had actors from India. We've had actors from Australia. We've had people from Boston, New York, come and join our readings. And so it doesn't, at this point, with all the access we have with technology, I don't think anyone should ever feel like they're that disconnected from great talent. How do you convince someone who's really talented to come read with you? Well, that's depends on how good you are, social media, I suppose. But there are certainly platforms like on Facebook where, actors of Facebook or actors in Dallas, Fort Worth area or wherever you happen to live, find some pool of talent. And probably if you live close enough to a major city, there probably is a writing group there you can join, become a part of. Like I said, Merely Writers where I am, but I've lived in New York, I've lived in Tampa, and I've had a writers group in every place I've lived. So it's, it's just a matter of looking and keeping an eye out, because I think there is a need for these kind of writers group where we read each other's works and act out and so on. Or if there is no place like that, start one. Be a self-starter. Be the change you want to see in the world, right? So if your area doesn't have a writers group, I bet you if you start one, I bet you a bunch of people will come out of the woodwork that you didn't know wrote plays. That's one of the things I found. I started this writers group, Merely Writers. People will write me and go, "Hey, I'm a writer." And I'm like, "Oh, that's cool. What do you do for a career?" And they're like, "Oh, I'm a firefighter." "Oh, but you're also a writer." And there's people that just have these interests on the side, maybe never really pursued them, but now that there's a venue for them, maybe they will pursue it.
So obviously, if you're in a writers group, you're getting feedback from writers. But when you're with your actors, if you have somebody reading your piece, so you can kind of hear it, and then I think there's always a handful of people that need to give you feedback.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
And how do you approach that? Are you open to it, or just like you stay in your lane and
No. I personally want feedback from other writers. I want feedback from the actors because they're the ones going to be saying the lines. I want feedback from the audience because they're the ones paying for a ticket or not. I want feedback from everybody. I want designers in that room to go, "Oh, I would love to set design this," or that just seems way too complicated to do a set design for this piece. I want that kind of feedback because that's, if they think it's too complicated, then probably every theater, the majority of theaters that send it out to are going to think it's too complicated. So I want that feedback. That's what helps me get this work produced as much as it does.
Sure. Oh, what are you working on now? Are you working on anything in particular? Or?
Yeah, right now I'm actually working on I finished a stage play during COVID, a full length piece, and right now I'm adapting it into a screenplay. So,
nice.
Yeah, it's a fun piece. It's sort of a satire on our previous president, and it's called "Your Privilege is Showing," and it's actually I say it's a satire of the previous president. It's really not about him, but he's kind of there. But it's actually a murder mystery that sets place in a rural hotel in Pennsylvania. So it's like a rural ski lodge in Pennsylvania, and there's a murder that takes place, and one of the characters may or may not be based on our former president. Let's put it that way. So, yeah, and it's a lot of fun. Trying to make it very Agatha Christie-esque.
Sure. Yes. You mentioned during COVID, do you think that I can't say there was anything that I really saw that really made me think that there's an arena, I don't know if that's the right word, for on these streaming platforms, on like Zoom and stuff like that. Do you think, I saw a couple productions throughout, and it just, it's missing. I don't know do you think that there's a place or
I think virtual platforms are great for readings. I think they're a wonderful place for readings because, again, you can have people from all over. As far as productions, the benefit that I've seen from productions is that you can have, like, for example, my mom lives in New York. She was able to see, I did a couple of Zoom productions. She was able to see them without paying for a plane ticket. Like, she was able to see my plays, which for years, I've been in Atlanta. She's up in New York. She hasn't been able to see a lot of my work. And so this was an opportunity for her to see quite a few of my work. So that was exciting. Nice. So there's something about, bridging the gap between distance with virtual platforms. But you are correct. You're not hearing the audience laugh. There's no immediate connection to the audience. You can't tell if you're doing a good job. I mean, yeah, at the end, they all say, "Oh, great job," but do they mean it? Usually that visceral gut reaction of the laugh and the crowd is really, let you know. And in this way, it's, cinema is like that, right? Cinema, you don't have that immediate connection with the audience either. But at least with cinema, you can go to the movie theater, you can hear the audience laugh with you or cry or whatever. And also with cinema, you have a lot more room for editing and for, manipulating the film footage. And so cinema has its own benefits, even though it's also removed from the audience. Zoom is like in the middle of cinema. It's like it's got all the worst parts of theater and all the worst parts of cinema. The only real positive is, again, the reach. You can have a lot more people from around the world be a part of it.
Yeah, I think there was one production. It was a high school production, matter of fact, of Dracula, Stephen Dietz's Dracula.
Cool.
And they cut it down to one act, but the director went and dropped off the equipment to each student's house, and they videotaped each section.
Oh yeah,
and they performed it that way. It wasn't live, however. So right. They did some really wonderful things and did some slides and inserts and stuff like that. That worked, and they did the great camera angle. So it's almost like a movie, but it was up, in that regard. But it seems like there's something there on these streaming platforms. I just don't know what the answer is, or if there is that potential, or is it just it's something we did. It's good for table reads and stuff like that. But
what I found, I directed a couple, and we we experimented with the form, and we were able to do some interesting things that I'm very proud of. I won't ever knock the what we accomplished, but one of the complaint that always comes up is you've got to be your own lighting designer. So if you're an actor and that's your strength, you also have to design your own lighting. You've got to do your own sound. You got to be in charge of your own framing. Usually when in a cinema, when you're doing film, you've got the camera, director of photography and the cameraman who know that is their skill set. They are well versed in how to frame a shot. You've got the lighting person who knows exactly how to make that lighting pop. You've got the sound people who know exactly, so you've got these people who have these expertise in these areas. And then you have the actor who's an expert at making their character come alive. But with Zoom and with all this virtual theater, because of COVID, they all had to be an expert in lighting and an expert in sound and an expert in framing and an expert in acting. That's a lot to ask. And now, if depending on the size of your cast, you've got 10 to 12 people, all 12 of them have to be an expert in every one of those things. That's a lot to ask. Now, on the upside, from an educational perspective, many of them stepped up to the challenge, and that was, wow, they're learning something new. So now when they go out to the real world, they have a skill set, but again, notice how I talked about Zoom versus the real world. When they go out into real theater, they may know a little bit more, or at least have a little bit more respect for the lighting people and the sound people and the director and so on. But again, asking them in the span of a 5 to 6 week rehearsal to become an expert in every one of these fields, that's a lot. That's a big ask. And also the other thing too, you're dealing with often actors with low budgets, actors with that can't afford to go out and buy the fanciest phones or fanciest cameras or the fanciest microphones or anything like that. They're going to be at a disadvantage. And so the actors who are a bit wealthier and can afford all this extra equipment are going to get work a lot more often than the actors who are really struggling. And that's not fair. It really is COVID really did teach me a lot too as a teacher about inequity, because I had a lot of students who couldn't afford the webcam and couldn't afford, so while we were really at the height of COVID, I had to teach from home and we were all on a webcam like this. I could afford the equipment, but a lot of my students couldn't. And so they'd come on and be like, okay, I need you to answer, this question or have a conversation about whatever, or do this monologue or whatever they were doing. And their computer would freeze up in the middle. And, it's like, how do you I can't take away their grade. They didn't ask to be in this class in a COVID, in this Zoom like platform, but it's really hard to grade them and give them a, because I can't see how good they are because of their equipment. And a lot of that was just, it was very clear to me which students could afford really good equipment and which students couldn't. And it was also clear to me, unfortunately, the students who could afford it tended to do better on the quizzes and everything else because, virtual was really easy for them, and other students were not as adept, and again, large part because of their equipment. And so, from acting to everything else, COVID really, this pandemic really did teach me a lot about inequity. I mean, I was aware of it, but that it brought it home in a very visceral way to me.
Are you back in the classroom now?
We are back in the classroom. In fact, my school was kind of in a rush. We went back in the classroom. We went out in March of 2020. We were back in by August of 2020. So we went right back in very quickly. I personally didn't feel we were ready to go back in, but the school didn't really care for my opinion. So we were back in, and I just double masked and, kept my distance from everybody.
And are theaters open, like live theater?
Theater is now starting to get back open. Audiences have to wear masks. A lot of theaters are requiring vaccination cards to get in here. But I am seeing more and more theaters open up, which is exciting. Even if you have to wear a mask in the auditorium, it's much better than not having live theater at all.
Sure. Yeah. This is a little bit of a tangent since we went in this COVID direction, but do you direct your own work, or do you just kind of like, I wrote it and I just want my hands away, or for free?
I have directed it. I have. A lot of it tends to be more of, okay, so I've written this script and I've not yet seen a really good production of this specific script. So in that case, I'll often want to direct it myself just to see, is it the script that's weak, or is it just hasn't really been in, a decent director's hands, that kind of thing. And so a lot of times I do like the experience of directing my own work. I'm also pretty good. One of the challenges a lot of playwrights face when they direct their own work is their ego gets in the way. And so, no, it has to be done this way. The script says this, and this is what I wrote, and this is how my brain works. I am very collaborative. So when I get in that director's chair, I pretend it's somebody else's script, and I'm able to kind of separate myself from it. And I say, okay, well, how do you see this moment? Okay, well, what can we do here? The same way I would direct any other piece that I direct. So I try to step away from it, and I'm aware of what it should be, but I try not to direct it from that perspective, because I'll get in my own way. I'll shoot myself in the foot, and it'll end up hurting the script more than helping it. So,
do you find that you've come to some realizations about a piece or two in that regard? It's like, oh, okay, wow, okay, maybe there's an issue here that I was not aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we just finished one. It was a Halloween piece. It was a short piece, 10-minute piece for Halloween. But there's a homeless man. He finds a dead body, and the dead body kind of looks like him a little bit. So he decides he wants to trade places with the dead body. So he takes his clothing off. He puts the clothing on. He puts, so he basically does this whole body swap. And it had only been produced once before, and I felt like it was a good production, but I felt like it needed more. And then when we did this, I was like, oh, it's really hard to change clothing from a dead body. Like, you've got to really like lift the body up and get the arms out of the thing. Like, there were so many logistical challenges to it. And some of the issues I saw with the previous production were that it was taking him way too long to get the dialogue out. It was really, the actor was just really, and I realized part of it was the struggle of getting the arm out of the sleeve and, things like that. So we had so I became much more aware of some of the technical ramifications that I'd written into the script that I had not really considered prior. So things like that do come up, and I do realize things about the script.
So what was the fix?
Well, the fix was, first off, I had him speak while doing, while changing the clothes and all that stuff. And then also it was a matter of just, okay, well, let's work with these two actors, because it wasn't an actual body. It was an actor who, and of course the sci-fi twist at the end is the other guy wakes up in the end, and you realize now he's dressed like the first guy, and it's still the first guy. He was dreaming the whole time. So the twist is that there was no dead body. He just, and he says, man, all my life I'm waiting for a rich dead guy to trade places with. I thought tonight was the night, Well, and anyway, so you realize it's been him the whole time. And I had to get two actors who look alike,
Right.
Yeah. But the fix was working with the two of them and figuring out what is the best for you to get this jacket off of him while he's laying on his back. How do we get it? Do we roll on the side? And, there was things like where he would go, okay, what if I just have my left arm in the sleeve, but my right arm is not in there, but I kind of wrap it around myself so it looks like it is, but I'm on my side. And this way he only has one arm to get out of the sleeve. So like the actors actually solved it themselves. But it was just a matter of like kind of going through and trusting them and asking them, this is what needs to happen. What do you think will work the best to make this happen? And then once they're part of the problem solving process, that really, it really makes things go a lot smoother. I think a lot of directors don't trust their actors to be part of the problem solving process. And I try to do that.
What do you think that becomes an ego thing as well for the directors? Like, again, like, no, I got this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can be. I'll tell you a funny story. My first time ever directing anything, I was in college, and I'm 19 years old, thinking I knew everything. And I was directing a piece for a class. It was a directing class. And I kind of did what we call puppet mastering, where I was like telling them, okay, now I want you to move your head like this. Now I want you to say this. And I kind of like every step of the way, I kind of, pinpointed. And my reason was I wanted to show off how detail oriented I could be. And I wanted my teacher to see that I knew how to make a really good stage picture. And my teacher came in and sat and he watched. And at the end, they said, if I was one of your actors, I'd have punched you in the face. Like, oh,
wow.
what? Yeah.
Wow,
I was like,
wow.
whoa, okay. He goes, you can't talk to people like that. They're not puppets. You got to talk to them and say, what do you want to do? How would you do? And so that was like one of the greatest learning experiences I ever had. From that point on, I was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. Listen, okay, this is what I need to see happen. How can you help me? Or how can we make this happen as a team? How can we work together to make this moment occur? And so then it becomes a lot more collaborative and it's a lot more fun for everyone involved.
Sure, absolutely. So where can people find your work?
All right. Well, I have a website. It's www.danguyton.com. And so that has pretty much everything there you might want. But you can also find me on Amazon. You look up Daniel Guyton on Amazon. I got all my plays for sale there. I'm also published with Next Stage Press, a bunch of different publishers. Pioneer Drama has one of my pieces. I'm on YouTube. On the Facebooks, all
nice.
that stuff. Yeah.
What's your YouTube?
My YouTube is actually, if you just go search for Daniel Guyton on YouTube. I think there's one other guy, but he doesn't have nearly as many videos as I do. So
what are your videos
I've got videos of a lot of my plays that have been
Oh.
produced. So I have, video recordings of those. I have some short films that I've made, a couple of trailers that I've got for projects that are in the works.
Nice.
Yeah, and I also have some old home movies when I was a kid that I kind of posted on there just for fun.
Nice.
Yeah, so I got a lot of variety of stuff.
And where can people follow you on Instagram or the Twitter?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and Instagram also. D Guyton21 on both.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Yes, sir.
Well, Daniel Guyton, I really appreciate you being in the Playwright Spotlight, and I hope we get to do this again sometime.
Me too. This was great.
Pleasure to finally meet you, and so I look forward to doing it again. Stay tuned next week or 2 weeks when we have another episode of the Playwright Spotlight.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have a playwright in your life who you think would enjoy these videos, please share it with them. And if you have a comment, question, or suggestion, or request for a playwright you'd like to see in future episodes, please leave a comment down below. And be sure to tune in every other Tuesday for new episodes, or check out some of our older episodes for more playwriting tips. And until then, and in the meantime, keep writing.